Okay, YouTube, KTM Freeride E versus Alta Redshift EXR. So that's the question that everybody has. Is this bike super inferior to the Alta? That's what you're going to find out. So I actually like the Alta. I was going to buy an Alta. I was actually trying to talk my dealer into carrying Altas. The Alta was a great machine. But you know, I don't think it's the unicorn. Was Alta way ahead of KTM? No, and I'm going to explain that. Was Alta first to market with a electric motocross bike? Yes, I think you could argue that Alta was the premier electric motocross bike. And that's pretty much because they're the only ones that made one. So, nothing against the Alta, and I'm going to break this down for you. The Alta was a great machine. Like I said, I would have owned one, but the Alta had some problems, and it wasn't problems with the machine. It was problems that they weren't a humongous company like KTM. So if you're trying to make a comparison between the KTM Freeride E-XC and the Alta Redshift EXR, that is honestly like kind of comparing the KTM Freeride 250F to the 500 EXC. That would be the equivalent comparison. If we're talking power for power, chassis for chassis, and weight to weight, that's really what we're comparing. So when somebody tries to compare this Freeride to an Alta Redshift, it's kind of ridiculous. So I'm going to lay out a couple things that I have noted in my phone here that kind of separate the two bikes apart and show you that this is not an inferior machine, it's just a different machine. This is a Chevy Malibu and the Redshift is a Corvette. You can't compare the two cars. They're just different tools. The KTM was designed kind of as a hybrid trials enduro. Maybe even a little bit more so in the gas versions of the bike, but that's what it is. It was focused on low weight, a smaller chassis, really easy to ride, and the Alta was not designed that way. The Alta was to showcase performance of electric, specifically batteries, and they put it in a motocross frame, and then they had, you know, an awesome rider that was formerly one of my customers at my shop. Josh Hill helped them develop the thing, right? And so they turned it into a badass motocross bike. It produced way more horsepower, produces 50 horsepower. You could compare that to the 500 EXC. The whole Freeride line from KTM, whether it's the 250, the 350, the 250R, or the electric, they're all producing in that like 20 to 26 horsepower range. So KTM obviously can produce a lot more horsepower from those 250 and 350 engines because they do in their SX bikes, but when they put it in the Freeride, they don't, because that's not the goal. They're trying to make it really easy to ride, you know, super reliable, forgiving, and they're just using that engine to just make it easy to ride in the trails. Even the 250R, like that's a 250 SX engine essentially that they took the power valve out of and they just toned it down and they put a small expansion chamber on it, and it, you know, produces in that 20 something horsepower range. So you can't compare the two. It's not apples and apples, it's apples and oranges. It's kind of cliche, but it's the way it is. So I've ridden this thing, I've looked at some of the reviews on the Alta stuff. Like, let's say in map 3 on this bike, you were only in map 2 on an Alta and they had 4 maps. Realistically, the Alta only had like 10 miles more range than the Freeride. And this is where I'm going to get into my notes a little bit more. So this bike has a 3.9 kilowatt hour battery, and the Alta had a 5.8 kilowatt hour battery. That means that the Alta had 67% more battery than the KTM. All right? And it only got 10 miles more range. In the real world, yeah, I know a bunch of dickheads online are saying, oh, it's got 50 miles and shit. Yeah, but the people that were actually riding them aren't reporting that. you know, these things get 30 miles of range or whatever too. No, when I'm out riding here pinned wide open, I'm getting between 18 and 25. So it's realistic. If you just sissy it around, you're going to get more mileage. If you're pinning it, you know, letting the juices flow and the electrodes flow, then you're going to get less mileage. So the Alta weighs 30 more pounds than the KTM of equivalent. So the E-XC here weighs like 244 and the Alta weighed 273. So that's 30 more pounds. That's 11% more weight than this bike. Remember in the beginning when I said that KTM was trying to basically create a lightweight bike that was easy to ride? Well, there you go. It's 11% lighter. People also say that it's 10 to 15% smaller overall, and I would agree with that. It's almost like it's on an 85 chassis, but it has bigger wheels. It's got 18 and 21s. If you added 30 pounds that the Alta weighs to the KTM's battery, obviously we wouldn't do that. It would make it heavier up top. They'd have to find some place to put the battery. If you added that 30 pounds, I don't know, a 6 kilowatt hour battery to the thing. Actually more than that. It would be like 7 or something. I mean, you're going to go a long ass ways. That basically says to me that the Alta battery technology wasn't really superior. They're getting the same damn range for the same amount of use. It wasn't light years ahead. I don't care what anybody says. The math doesn't stack up. Were their batteries good? Yes. I have nothing against the Alta. It's just that people are fantasizing a little bit more than they're living in reality. The Alta was an awesome machine. It's not a fantasy, right? It was great. The Alta costs $2,000 more than this. So you can buy another KTM battery for $3,500, all right? KTM batteries are hot swappable. You cannot hot swap an Alta battery. If you watch the documentary thing where they tried to race it on Erzberg, they needed to make a pit stop and a really long pit stop so that they could change the battery out on the Alta. The KTM is 4 bolts. It like takes 30 seconds to pop that thing out of there with a rattle gun, and you jam a new battery back in. So I'm going to get into that too. So you can hot swap the KTM, you cannot hot swap the Alta. So in other words, if you go to the track and you rip through your battery in your first moto, you've got to charge the son of a bitch before you can ride another moto. This thing right here, I've ridden it on the motocross track and got 50 minutes out of it. So I'm going to easily be able to run a moto, and if I wanted to make sure that I had enough for the next moto, I could jam another battery in the thing real quick. So if you take the $2,000 cost more of the Alta, you need a generator at the track to charge the Alta. All right, well, crappy generator is going to be the $1,500 that the KTM battery is going to be extra. And, you know, it's likely more because you're going to need a powerful generator. You can't just charge these, you know, high capacity batteries off of crap. You got to get good stuff. So you end up costing more for the Alta to be able to charge it at the track than you would be to just buy another battery for the KTM. All right, so not that the performance on the track is the same as the Alta. I'm not trying to say that, but I'm just trying to kind of compare apples to apples so that people can get this concept. So, you know, you can ride enduro on this. It's actually a really good enduro machine, and a lot of people have. And especially if it's really tight, it would be good. And you could race 2 motos. You just get another battery. KTM specifically designed this water cooled because they're renting these things and stuff. You can shove multiple batteries in and out, in and out, in and out. They had all those top enduro riders in Europe testing these things. They tested them at Erzberg back in 2013. They were hot swapping batteries and stuff out of these things, and they were getting hot. KTM adds radiators to it, so you have a water-cooled engine in this that you can just keep dropping batteries into, and you're not going to have heating issues. That's pretty freaking awesome. That right there means that KTM is ahead of Alta. Maybe not in their battery technology, but in the engine design, it's water-cooled, and you can hot swap batteries. So the other thing about this bike is it's on the KTM Freeride platform. That platform's been around for 7 years that I know of. At least 2013 is when they started producing them, and they actually started producing the electric ones in 2013 too. There are crap loads of Freerides out there. Probably tens of thousands. I know that there's thousands of the electrics in Europe alone, And then you have the 250R, the 250F, the 350. There's tons and tons of them. They're all the same damn chassis. The difference is they cut the damn frame off right here and they used the motor as an engine spar. So that's the difference in the chassis. They're essentially the same. The suspension, everything is all the same. Wheels, sprockets, forks, shock, everything is the same. Swing arm. So all the parts for the Freeride E or gas are all interchangeable. So tons and tons of them. The other thing that they share parts with are the 85s from KTM and Husqvarna. So the suspension is exactly the same. I just ordered fork springs and shock springs and stuff for this. The 85 SX, you can drop the valves, you can drop all the stuff in here. They're the same diameter. The new 85s use the AER fork, and this is the Explorer fork, but the springs and everything are still the same. Now they don't make springs stiff enough. Anyway, that's another video. Bottom line is that, like on this bike, I put a hole shot device from an 85 on it. The front end is the same. The wheels are the same. The only thing different on the rear wheel is the sprocket is a 520 because this bike produces more torque than the 428 on the 85. But basically the wheels are the same kind of build. They're just bigger. So 85 front fender, 85 number plate. I mean, I've ordered this stuff for it. It takes these 85 parts. So you got the 85 parts, you've got the Freeride parts, you got tons of these things. And like I said, KTM's been making them for 2013, so there's a shitload of stuff for these bikes. Tons and tons and tons. Now the next thing is if you look at this engine right here, it was always KTM's vision to deploy this as an e-mobility engine. They developed it off-road. What better place to torture test something than to have a bunch of professional enduro guys roaching it out at Erzberg? You really, really test this thing when you test it off-road. KTM is planning, I've seen the brochures, to turn this into an e-mobility. So if you think about that and they go into a country like India or something where they can sell 100,000 units, these things going into those, you know, scooters and things like that, this platform isn't going away. It's just like the KTM two-stroke platform. There's a billion of them out there. There's going to be a billion of these things out there. And when it's not going away, the battery technology is going to evolve. So the smart choice buying this thing is now the battery technology's already changed once. It already got 50% more capacity in 2018 than it did in 2017. So 2 years from now, what's going to happen? Well, they're going to come out with a new battery cell. Tesla's going to develop something or something sick. And maybe it gets smaller and lighter. Maybe an aftermarket company takes over and is starting to make the batteries. So it's just smart. This is smart. It's a more advanced platform than everybody gives it credit for because nobody knows about them. And it's just a bunch of guys in Europe riding them in the woods and riding them at e-parks, a bunch of beginners, and nobody's really looked into them. KTM's vision, e-mobility. Put a torture tested off-road. I'm out here wringing the dog crap out of this thing on this little track. So this is a WP Explorer fork. You know, the Alta had a 48 millimeter Explorer fork. The same damn fork, different diameter, right? Different valving. Maybe the Alta's worked a little bit better. You know, it depends on the Alta you're riding, the motocross bike or the enduro. But it's the same damn fork in 43 millimeters. And you know, the Alta was a heavier machine. It was smarter to put the bigger fork on it. It wasn't a trail bike. It's smarter to put the bigger fork on it. It's a motocross bike. It's smarter to put the bigger fork on it. But this is none of those things. So the smaller fork was okay, and it keeps the weight down on the bike, right? So KTM owns WP. So KTM owns the suspension components that were on the Alta. And, you know, the Alta suspension was crap. You can watch videos about Josh Hill talking about how he blew the thing out the first day, you know, and then they went to KTM apparently and got some WP suspension for the thing and put WP suspension on the Alta. So you know, people forget that not too long ago, the 43 millimeter fork was the standard in motocross. My last 250 SX that I bought, well, when I got out of riding, was 2001. I bought the thing brand new. I assembled it myself. I ordered it myself. I was the freaking KTM dealer. I got that bike at a 43 millimeter fork on it. No problems with that thing. In the 90s and maybe even early 2000s, they were racing professional motocross on a 43 millimeter fork. That does not mean that this is an inferior fork. If they were busting out pro motos for decades on stuff that was this big or smaller. So, you know, Jeremy McGrath won at least probably 5 of his Supercross titles or whatever on 43 millimeter forks from Showa. So, you know, basically none of the Japanese trail bikes, don't quote me on that. There's probably some out there if you really dig, if you really want to prove me wrong. But basically, for decades, none of the Japanese trail bikes came with a fork as big as this 43 millimeter fork. And they also weren't upside down. This increases rigidity. This KTM little putt-putt trail bike, trials bike, comes with 43 millimeter forks. So quit freaking bagging on the 43 millimeter forks. It's not the forks that suck. It's the valving that sucks. It's trials valving. I'm out here ripping around wide open motocross pace on it. I don't expect it to work good. It's trials valving. The rebound is way too fast and it's undersprung. It pushes in corners. That's not anything wrong with the bike. That's wrong with the valving. If you expect to get it and not make changes to it, to adapt it to what you're going to be riding versus what it was made for, then you can't expect it to work right. It's dumb. Just plain dumb. I'm going to be riding this thing motocross style on little tiny tracks. I'm going to have to change the valving in this likely. I've already got stiffer springs and stuff for it. But it is what it is. It has the same damn suspension that the Alta had. It's got the Explorer fork and the Explorer shock. No, the Alta was not light years ahead of the KTM. It's like, give me a break. It was not light years ahead in technology. It was maybe light years ahead to marketing to the motocross people. I'll give them that. I think they were cool bikes. I'm not bagging on them. So, I mean, tomorrow, if KTM took this engine, motor, it's electric, we'll call it a motor, this motor, and put it in their, 450 SX chassis, and put a 6 kilowatt battery in it like Alta did, maybe change the mapping. I don't know if they can milk more power or they'd have to put a little bit bigger engine in it or what. I'm not an electrician. I don't really understand how it works that much. But anyway, they could run this thing, map 2 could be like map 3, and that would be the easy map. This thing produces 31 foot-pounds of torque, man. That's the same as a 252 stroke wide open. You know, it's fast. And if you gave it more battery capacity and they geared it a little bit differently, and maybe they milked a little bit more power out of it, and didn't just try and make it a 26 horsepower engine, maybe they put it to 37, 40, 42 horsepower. That thing would be an Alta beater from day one. 450 SX chassis, this engine, milk a little bit more power out of it, put a 6 kilowatt battery in it, and it would smoke the Alta. You've already got a proven chassis that's won countless world championships at this point. So, I mean, come on, guys. Let's get real about it. This is people talking out their ass that don't have any experience. They're just trying to be loud on the internet so that people will pay attention to them. They're not experts. They've never ridden them. You know, I haven't ridden an Alta. I don't need to. I know what it is. I know that it has tons of power because I've ridden this one and the Alta produced like 20 more foot-pounds of torque and 30 more horsepower. I know it was fast. I know its range sucked. I know that you had to charge it up at the track where you can just hot swap a battery. I don't need to ride one. It has WP suspension on it. I've ridden WP suspension exclusively since 2000 or 2001. It's like, I get it. I know what it is. I wanted one. I would have paid for one. You know, it's just, let's quit drawing comparisons on the two machines. They're different machines. If you want to race motocross on this thing like I'm actually going to, you're not going to do it on big tracks. I'm going to do it on little tracks. I'm going to redo the suspension. You can already probably see I don't have the stock tires on it. I've got the headlights and stuff off of it. I've stripped all that out. The kickstand's going to come off on moto days. I've got a low profile tire on the back, motocross knobby, and that's how I'm going to ride it. I've already got a stiffer shock spring coming. I'm going to do a suspension video, but you know, the brakes really aren't that bad. They're okay. They're not Brembo units. KTM updated the brakes again in 2018. The older models did have some brake issues. I managed a shop that sold this formula brake stuff for the 65s and 85s for 5 years or whatever. I was doing that, and another 3 years after that I was just doing parts. But I get it. I've replaced all this stuff. I worked in the dealer. We were a motocross shop. We had kids that were factory sponsored KTM riders. We had multiple pros. I know how this crap works. So I rode this thing just fine today. The only thing that sucks about the rear brake for me right now is it's on the hand, and then that's a disability that I have. I cannot brake as well with my hand as I can my foot. I've already ordered a kit. I'm also going to do a video on that, a kit to put the brake pedal on this. And so let's quit drawing comparisons between the Alta Redshifts and the KTM Freerides. It's a damn trail bike on a smaller chassis, essentially a beginner style chassis. It is fast. I almost never ride this thing in map 3. It doesn't have top speed, no, but it rips out of corners. When I'm on these little tight tracks, the back end will come out just because it is putting so much power to the ground so quickly. 31 foot-pounds of torque instantly. That's a 300 at 10,000 RPMs instantly. So, you know, let's just mellow it out on the Alta BS. Alta's not even in business anymore, so how good of an investment is it to be in an Alta? What happens in 5 years when the battery starts to go to crap? Maybe they won't go to crap. You're going to have somebody build one for you. What's that going to cost? These KTMs are going to be around for years to come. You know, even if KTM came out with a motocross bike next year, there's a pretty decent chance that I would probably want one, even though I'm using this just to kind of renegade in the backyard and close to home, which is what KTM was marketing it for, funny enough. If KTM comes out with a motocross bike, or maybe Honda comes out with their e-motocross bike in, you know, a couple years or whatever, then sell this thing. That means that if those companies are coming out with more bikes, that the electric is becoming more desirable. You pawn this one off on your wife, or you sell it to your neighbor for his wife, or maybe you've got a 14-year-old kid and that kid starts riding it. You sell it to some 14-year-old kid, and then you buy that badass motocross bike for yourself that you don't have to throw the suspension and the springs and, you know, all these sorts of things at. Let's not compare motocross bikes to trail bikes. This machine is freaking killer. I have tons of fun on it. I'm going to review it. There is a few things that I'll nitpick in the review. I paid full price for this thing. I don't have any biases towards things that I buy. I will flat out tell you if they suck. And this bike does not suck. So in conclusion, this is not an Alta Redshift. It's not inferior to an Alta Redshift. It's just a different bike than the Alta Redshift. And so if you have an Alta, congratulations. I would love to ride it sometime if you'll let me. But for now, I'm riding this E-XC, and I'm very happy that I can go to my dealer and order parts for it, and it's not out of business. And I'm having a freaking hoot on this thing. If you like KTM Freeride videos, you're going to get a lot more. I got some more riding footage probably coming in the next day or so after I upload this video, and maybe the day before this video. And then we're going to be pumping out a lot of content on this thing. I am going to be the authority on these bikes, and I am going to tell you everything you need to know about these. I'm going to tell you how to modify them. I'm going to tell you what they're good for, what they're not, and I'm going to be straight up freaking honest with you, because that's the only way that I know how to be. I am very unfiltered dude, and we're going to get these things the recognition that they deserve, and maybe we can get some more cool stuff from manufacturers. So stay tuned, you guys. Thanks for tuning in. That was a pretty long-winded video, but I hope that I covered some stuff. If you have questions, if you don't agree with me, whatever, post it down below, and if I'm wrong, I'll let you know. And maybe I'll do a retraction video. I'm not too big. I don't think I know everything, but I know some pretty simple things, and a lot of people just don't do the research. And I like to just dive into the things that I'm into, and so I wanted to kind of clear some of that up. Anyway, like and subscribe wherever those things pop up. Hit the notification bell. We're gonna put this thing through some badass stuff. I got a bunch of friends that are so stoked about it that they're building jumps in the yard. So you're gonna see me doing more and more jumps and more bigger jumps on this thing, especially once I get the suspension all done. So thanks again for watching. Always appreciate you guys, and take care. I hope you guys are surviving the coronavirus and everybody's healthy. See ya.